at a granular level. So for example, here is a map my colleague Sahidi did of heat waves in India. On the left, this is using publicly available data. And you can see at a national level, you get some insights on where heat waves occurred. And these data are updated daily, which is pretty good. But then on the right, you see from tomorrow.io, for the same city in New Delhi, the data are much more granular. So if you wanted to do a project about the heat waves impact on vulnerable people in a city, you want the private sector data. And those data are updated every hour. We found that when we're responding to the conflict in Ukraine or the more recent earthquake in Syria and Turkey, because we've already signed these agreements, we can receive the data very quickly in time to inform the insight. This is very different from the way we worked before. And what we found is we've had to change the way we produce our outputs. We can't produce reports when there's a crisis that's ongoing because we have to continually update the insights. So instead, we've started putting together packages that include foundational data sets. These are the open and proprietary data sets needed to produce the analysis. Reusable methodologies, and we use reusable as a term very carefully because it's not enough to be able to reproduce an insight. It has to be reusable across different countries and contexts. And then finally, we're very rigorous about documenting the code so that we can build the capacity of our other staff in our organizations, but most importantly, of our government counterparts so they can reproduce the insights. So with that, I'd like to introduce Casey Weston. He is the co-lead for the Data for Impact program at LinkedIn, and he's going to introduce their program and their motivations for working with data for public good.
Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to the UN World Data Forum and the
Go ahead,
host
Casey.
government for organizing this amazing event. On the next slide, please. As Holly mentioned, my name is Casey Weston, and I co-lead LinkedIn's Data for Impact program. Um, sorry, one more slide there, I think. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, great. As I was saying, LinkedIn's Data for Impact program provides aggregated, anonymized insights on the hiring, skills, and career transitions of as many members as we can across the workforce and across the world. We do this to inform the investments, policies, and programs of our public sector partners. And I often get asked, why would LinkedIn freely share data on um, that we have on our platform with public sector partners? And for us, it comes down to our vision as a company, which is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, for all of the world's professionals. And so we believe that any small role that we can play in informing the investments that go into improving labor market function or the economy are good not only for the world and for the different countries that we work with, but also for us as a platform, because when the labor market thrives, so do we. I'm not sure if the slides are still available, but I would sort of move to share that we can't unfortunately provide access to all of our data because it's very important for us to preserve privacy. We have a commitment to our members to uphold to make sure that we protect their privacy at all costs, which means that we work with a very specific menu of data offerings that we can share. So there are about 6 indicators that we use that share insights about different industries that are hiring at different rates by country, or where women may be underrepresented in the workforce and interventions could help in driving equity in specific contexts. We also look at the skills that are associated with specific occupations and specific industries to help public sector actors think about how to address skills gaps as they might occur in industrial transitions or thinking about the green transition. However, just with as with all private sector data sets, there are limitations to our data. First, we must protect privacy, which means that we cannot share any individual level data. We are often asked for very, very granular insights from our partners, and unfortunately, we cannot provide those. Yeah, I think if you move forward just one more slide. There we are. That's perfect. Thank you so much. So we can't provide insights at that granular level. Instead, we have to look at a little bit bigger level to make sure that we're protecting privacy. Second, we know that our platform is not perfectly representative as an administrative data set might be, which means that we have to work with our partners to understand what those biases might be and to make sure that they take them out of the data or consider them when they're interpreting our data. And finally, our data is focused more on labor supply than on labor demand. So when there are questions about demand, we can only speak to them somewhat obliquely. And so we encourage all of our partners to really think about our data sets as supplements, never replacements to the existing data sets that they use. Last slide, please. Despite these limitations, we found that we have had some success in working with public sector partners to inform investments, programs, and policies. So we've worked with the National Science Foundation to develop a research plan that examines the outcomes of investments in innovation and develops a new indicator using our data. Another win for us as a company is that we can gain insights from the partners that we work with as well that inform our work. Of course, with the Development Data Partnership, we've had incredible experiences working with dozens of different projects, including one informing a nearly $2 billion strategic plan. Of course, our data was only one small part, but we were very proud that it helped build out a plan for addressing gender inequities in a labor market. Finally, we've worked closely with government counterparts to integrate our data into their platforms and help them examine potential nuances that our data might offer because it comes at a much faster rate than administrative data can come or at a much more granular rate. So with that, those are some of the wins that we've had, and we're excited to think together about how we can pursue more wins in the future with the partnership and with those of you in the room there. With that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Laura McGorman from Meta.
Thank you, Casey. Laura McGorman is the director for the Data for Good program at Meta, a longtime partner of the partnership. Go ahead, Laura.
Thanks so much, Holly, and thanks, Casey, as well, for the warm introduction. My name is Laura. I run a program called Data for Good at Meta, and I would first just like to extend my appreciation to Holly and the whole team running the Development Data Partnership. This is an amazing program that I think has really streamlined our ability to deliver data sets to a range of multilateral institutions. And as Holly mentioned at the beginning, it's no small feat to sign streamlined license agreements, nor is it a small feat to streamline proposals from these institutions. So the first thing I want to do is just express my gratitude to the teams involved in these partnerships. The Data for Good at Meta program has been in existence for about 6 years. And it's a program that I'm really proud to say is now operating at scale. And what do I mean by scale? Right now, we actually have data license agreements with over 650 bilateral partners in over 80 countries. Over 500 case studies have been published using our data sets, and 50 of those alone have come from the World Bank. And so we're really proud of our longstanding partnerships with not only the World Bank, who I know has been one of the founders of the Development Data Partnership, but the many other organizations that participate as well, ranging from IMF, OECD, and others. The mission of the Data for Good at Meta program is to share data that strengthens communities and advances social issues while protecting user privacy. This is absolutely a mandate that we share in common with LinkedIn, and that protecting user data privacy is paramount to the success of our program. But it's amazing that we're able to do this by using novel techniques such as differential privacy and other privacy enhancing technologies that ensure even when we do share data, which often we do through not only license agreement but publicly, that we do so in a way that absolutely protects privacy of our users. Some of the types of data sets that we bring to bear to solve social issues range from things like mobility data, which played a very key role in understanding the spread of COVID-19, as well as adherence to things like stay-at-home orders. We also have amazing data sets on social connections and friendship ties around the world. So we publish a data set called the Social Connectedness Index, which has been used to examine various phenomenon ranging from international trade to lending across countries to not only the spread of information. And we've had a number of amazing case studies in collaboration with the World Bank and other data development partners. Some of my most favorite recent ones are how the World Bank used a survey of ours that we hosted on the Facebook platform, asking people who'd been affected by the war in Ukraine what their biggest needs were. And what we found through that survey was, although there was an initial set of hypotheses that people mostly needed food and housing, what many people said they needed in the aftermath of the crisis in Ukraine was actually help with registration as well as help with seeking work. And so the World Bank actually pivoted some of their investments from the food and housing areas towards greater investments in employment and registration assistance. Another really cool case study comes from a collaboration with the World Bank using our Future of Business survey, which is a long-standing partnership that we've been running with the World Bank and OECD, which is a survey that we promote to small business owners who use the Facebook platform. And over the course of many years, we were able to gather really amazing information around differences in female owned firms compared to male owned firms. And we found that there was really interesting changes in the closure rates of women owned firms as a result of COVID-19 school closures around the world, including in the developing world. And so the World Bank has produced some amazing research about how we can mitigate some of the unique impacts of school closures and the profound ongoing impacts that COVID-19 restrictions have played on women owned firms using non traditional data, including surveys run on our platform. And last but not least, going a little bit further back into the pandemic, it was really amazing to see how the World Bank in the early days of the pandemic used our high resolution population density maps, which are again publicly available maps that we build with satellite imagery, as well as census data to provide really fine grained and coarse resolution on where people live around the world. This is something started many years ago to actually inform our own connectivity efforts, and we now share that data freely with the world. That data set proved very useful for better targeting of investments in terms of locations of both testing and health facilities in Spain, because these population density maps, when shared at such high resolution, can really help better understand the catchment areas of health facilities and how to best optimize investments during things like infectious disease outbreaks. So again, these are just a very small selection of some of the amazing work that partners like the bank have done using our data sets. And we welcome anyone who's interested in becoming a partner of ours to visit our website at dataforgood.facebook.com, and look forward to receiving some questions in the chat. And I'll pass it back to Holly.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was great. Uh, Next, we'll hear from some of our colleagues who have been working with alternative data and their development work, starting with Sahidi Sarva. She's a data scientist with the World Bank Data Lab, and she worked with a team using alternative data to inform our Turkey country office on the immediate impacts, economic impacts of the Turkey-Syria earthquake. Over to you, Sahidi.
Thank you so much, Holly. Um, I'm just going to try sharing my screen. Let me know once you can see it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So today I want to talk a little bit about one of the most recent crisis response projects that we did in the data lab at the World Bank, which, as Holly was mentioning before, was one of our pilot studies to put together something that replaces the report, where we try to give more dynamic documents that we can keep updating as the crisis is over and as recovery is occurring in a particular country. So for the case of Turkey, what we did is we started with a bunch of foundational data sets, primary data sources like surveys and other secondary data sets created by other organizations like our data partners, Meta and LinkedIn and Facebook and Ookla and so on and so forth. Uh, these data sets form the foundation upon which all of the other relevant indicators are created, and the team sitting in Turkey, the World Bank team sitting in Turkey, could start using these indicators to inform how the economy was impacted in Turkey immediately after the earthquake. So one example of a foundational data set that we used in this case was the earthquake impact data from USGS, which showed the impact in different areas of Turkey of the many earthquakes that occurred on the 6th of February and on the 20th of February. We then plotted them on a map to identify the areas which had the most amount of impact, which is in the most southern region of Turkey. Uh, And then we also started using population data sets like the one Laura was just talking about, where we use the high resolution population data from Meta, which is the data set that's publicly accessible. And we noticed that one of the more impacted areas of the earthquake, which is Sahin Bay, is actually very highly populous. Um, Adding to this, if you're looking at economic impact, we obviously needed the wealth data of the entire country. And for that, one data set we found very useful was the relative wealth index, again from Meta, which predicts the relative standard of living within a country using de identified connectivity data, satellite imagery, and other non traditional data sources. So every point you're seeing on this map is roughly 20 kilometers, which is highly granular. And using this, we actually realized that some of the areas that were impacted in the south of Turkey are actually quite poor, closer to, and some of them are actually also slightly richer than the rest of the country. Um, Following this, given the team wanted to look at the economic impact, we looked at how business activity changed before and after the earthquake. The dataset we used for this was Meta's business activity trends. This dataset includes an aggregated number of public posts on Facebook business pages and compares it to how that page had posts 90 days prior to the crisis event. And this is calculated at an admin 2 region. Using this data set, we noticed that on the 5th of February, there were some parts that were doing better than 3 months before, some part that was doing worse. But immediately after the earthquake, almost the entire country was completely hit. But the more interesting part was that, or how these businesses started to recover over time after the earthquake. When we look at the national averages, we see that immediately after around the earthquake, there was a massive slump, but slowly after that, businesses started to recover from the earthquake itself. Another indicator we looked at was the change in mobility. And for this, we used data from one of our data partners, Veriset. So Veriset provides GPS location data, which can be used to track movement between locations. And using a working methodology, we saw that the number of visits to points of interest generated by these smartphones, especially in construction sites, which is the yellow line you see here, had dropped significantly after the earthquake. Um, and this can be seen with a small amount of delay because of how the data comes in, but this is still an extremely granular data set that allows you to see which areas have less mobility and which areas had more mobility and how that corresponds with the crisis that occurred in the country. Following mobility, one of the other indicators we looked at was internet connectivity. um, we used meta network coverage maps to measure internet connectivity in the earthquake. And what you're looking at here is the number of areas that have around 600 meters in area that do not have network connectivity. So what you see is that immediately after the earthquake, the number shoots up, which is that a lot of places lost network connectivity. But the very resilient fact of internet that you see here is that quickly after the earthquake, there were that number reduced, which is that all of the places that had internet 30 days prior to the crisis event continue to have internet now. And this was corroborated with another data set that we received from our data partner Ookla, where we saw the number of speed tests taken by different users within Turkey. So Ookla is a data set where anybody who wants to take a speed test can just go on speedtest.net and conduct a test to see how quick or fast their internet is in that area. We used this data set to compare of how the users were doing compared to 3 months prior to the Turkey earthquake. And we noticed that around the earthquake, there was a drop in the number of users that were using the speed tests, which also checks out with what we were seeing with the metadata set. But the best part of creating all of these indicators and having all of these foundational data sets available is the insights that we could draw from it when we started to put them together. So, one of the sample indicators that we were playing around with was that if you put damaged buildings data from the Turkish government along with business activity data from Meta, we see that there is one part of Turkey where there was no drop in manufacturing despite having many collapsed buildings. And this can start to give some insights on what kind of buildings were collapsed in that particular area. Another example of what happens when we start putting these the data sets together is when we combine three different data sources from the damaged buildings from the Turkish government, data from OpenStreetMaps, which tells us the different points of interest, and survey information from premise. So when we use the OSM healthcare locations, which is the green dots you see, along with damaged buildings, we notice that likely some of the hospitals or healthcare locations are damaged. And this was corroborated with a third data set from Premise, which is a survey which asked people, is the nearest hospital or primary healthcare facility around you functional or not? And we did notice that some people said yes to that question. And uh, once all of these indicators were created, what we in the end documented all of the codes and notebooks that can be used, and this data can be updated as new data keeps coming in. And this is what we call a data good. This data good can now be used to perform a very similar analysis in other countries or other crises. Or if the same internet connectivity needs to be measured in Syria after the earthquake, you can use the same notebook, rerun it for Syria, and you will start seeing the indicators for that country as well. And what more, the documentation and the code and the report that we have, all of them can be translated into different languages at ease using Google Translate, and that way it can be more accessible to a lot more people and widely used. And lastly, we put all of our code and documentation into a GitHub repository, which is available. And if it really opens up a lot of doors for collaboration, where if people think that we can improve our methodology or add to it or use it and see that in a different country we might have to change a few things, they can just fork the repository and start making the changes and start pushing them in. And with that, that is the work that we did for Turkey, and I hope that was interesting. I will now pass it back to Holly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sihidi. Okay, what's all PPT? Next, I'm very happy to introduce Chiyun Shang, a projects officer in the Monetary and Capital Markets Department of the International Monetary Fund. She is the project lead of the Green Recovery Data Hub, an initiative to monitor the climate impacts of post-COVID economic recovery. Chiyun is joined by Mahmoud Kutlukaya, a senior economist in the Financial Institutions Division of the IMF Statistics Department. Okay, over to you, Chiyun.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Shang Qiuyun from the International Monetary Fund. It's a pleasure to be here today to share our data project, the Green Recovery Data Hub, and how we collaborated with Development Data Partnership on this initiative. Next slide, please. First, I would like to provide some background on the project. In the aftermath of the COVID outbreak, more countries have been seeking to rebuild their economies while also align with the sustainability or climate change objectives. However, monitoring this effort can be challenging due to the highly fragmented nature of the data, as well as data gaps that make it difficult to form concrete policy measures for sustainable recovery visions. To tackle these challenges, our team built the Green Recovery Data Hub, which is a central data platform to monitor the climate impact of the post-COVID economic recovery, with over 20 indicators covering areas from climate policies to green finance. The project was a winner at 2020 IMF Innovation Competition and was officially launched last year. Next slide, please. During this project, we were very fortunate to find out about the Development Data Partnership, which helped us close a lot of the critical data gaps. We submitted proposals to collaborate with data partners such as Meta and LinkedIn, and sometimes the collaboration involved creating data from scratch. Take green employment data as an example. We needed to define what green jobs are and how to measure the transition of the labor markets towards greener occupations. We work very closely with the LinkedIn team to address these questions by clarifying, reviewing taxonomy, and review draft data methodology. And this work contributed to a new LinkedIn green job dataset, which our team used to create indicators that provide analysis of the green job growth trends. Next slide, please. These climate data and insights produced through these partnerships has been a great addition to the IMF's climate work. They are supporting hundreds of IMF staff to better monitor and advise more than 190 member countries on climate-related policy issues, as well as facilitate country level analysis. The work also help encourage a lot of new ideas to use partnership data to strengthen its monitoring of climate risks and their implications on policy. We are very grateful for all the support from our data partners and look forward to more collaboration in the future. Now I will pass on to my colleague Mahmoud to share more of climate work at the IMF.
Thank you, Chuyun. At this point in time, I would like to talk about the climate change and the IMF and how our collaboration with the Development Data Partnership is relevant for the fund in broader context. The fund assesses that climate change presents a major threat to long-term growth and prosperity, and it has direct impact on the economic well-being of all countries. The IMF plays a role in helping its members address those challenges of climate change. In this context, the fund publishes research on economic implications of climate change and provides policy advice to our membership. Next slide, please. To support research and policy advice, having timely and relevant data is of utmost importance. Accordingly, the IMF Statistics Department is leading two main initiatives, the Climate Change Indicators Dashboard and the New Data Gaps Initiative. The Climate Change Indicators Dashboard is an international initiative to address the growing needs for climate-related data used in macroeconomic and financial stability analysis. The dashboard aims to become a comprehensive aggregator for statistical indicators on climate change. In the same vein, the Data Gaps Initiative aims to close the policy-relevant data gaps. The newly initiated DGI-3 includes 14 recommendations addressing 4 statistical areas where climate change forms half of the recommendations. Next slide, please. Official statistics are always important. However, to respond to the pressing data needs to support policy formulation, there is a need for finding new and innovative ways. For instance, today, to achieve climate goals, we need to immediately curb the emissions across the world, which requires, as an example, implementing stricter policies on carbon taxation. This could, on the other hand, have potential to create transition risks, especially for the most polluting firms that will be severely affected. This risk will also indirectly affect the workers serving these industries. Therefore, it's crucial to closely monitor the trends in these industries and guarantee that the transition is a just transition. As we discussed earlier, LinkedIn's data provide us with great tools to closely monitor this process without having to wait for long legs for official statistics. Considering the time limit, I will not go into details with the second example. But we have one clear message here. The Green Recovery Data Hub illustrated innovative ways of using untraditional data, such as development data partnership, to bridge these data gaps. With this opportunity, next slide, please. I would like to thank colleagues who participated in this initiative. Our colleague Eugene Kim is attending the event in person, so please feel free to follow up with us if you have any comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both. Next, I'm happy to introduce Rob Marty, a data analyst with the World Bank's Development Impact Monitoring Evaluation Team, and he'll be presenting on behalf of the Kenyan Urban Roads Authority. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you so much. Again, my name's Rob Marty, and this is a project that's focusing on the intersection of COVID-19 policies and road safety. So as we know, COVID-19 mobility policies kind of changed mobility and patterns across the world. So this is kind of looking at downstream effects of how it impacted road safety. And we use a case study of Nairobi to look at the impacts of these policies, but I think a lot of the insights can be fairly generalizable across a lot of different contexts as well. So next slide, please. So again, we're going to focus in on the case of Nairobi and looking at the intersection of COVID-19 policies and road safety, as this is part of kind of a larger road safety work. And as COVID-19 hit, we kind of transitioned and used a lot of these private sector data sources to kind of like really target in to look at how mobility and road safety were changing and kind of after the implementation of kind of COVID-19 policies. So just kind of a quick rundown of COVID-19 policies that were implemented in Kenya. Like much of the world, there were closures and work from home orders. And in Nairobi in Kenya, there was a curfew that was implemented from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And this was relaxed a little bit starting in June, where the curfew hours were revised to 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. So we're really going to look at this curfew that was implemented as that was one of the more stringent policies that were implemented in Kenya. And one of the things that we even notice on social media is people commenting about the intersection of the curfew and road safety. So the curfew being implemented at 7 p.m. is right around when you see rush hour it happen. So people were at least complaining on social media that people were trying to rush to get home to beat the curfew, or there was a lot of congestion, and people were kind of even noticing that this could impact road safety. So we kind of bring these questions that you even see from the public on social media to the data to kind of really dig into what's happening with this intersection between the two. So next slide, please. So first, we're going to take data on road traffic crashes and severity from 3 different sources. So some of this is coming from administrative data, and some data we're also getting from private sector data sources. So first, we work with the National Police Service, where we've digitized over 17,000 paper records of crash reports to create a digital data set of crashes in Nairobi. Second, we're partnering with an emergency response dispatch platform called Flare and using their emergency responses of crashes. And third, we used in Kenya, Twitter is a popular platform for people to kind of post issues about congestion and crashes as well. So we use crowdsourced reports of crashes from Twitter to also look at trends in crashes over time. Next slide, please. And then for looking at congestion, speed, and mobility, we take data from private sector sources. So here we're using Waze data to look at congestion. We're using Google data to look at mobility patterns and traffic speed. And we're also bringing in data from Uber to look at traffic speed. So again, pulling together data from across a number of different private sector data sources, mostly coming from the Development Data Partnership, to get a sense for both crashes, but also changes in mobility patterns as well. So next slide, please. So first, we're looking at kind of the main impacts on mobility. So from Google mobility data, we see a sharp reduction in mobility across the city that happens right as these policies were implemented, and especially in the first couple of months after the policies were implemented is when mobility is lowest and increases a little bit, but doesn't, really increase to baseline levels for in the period that we're looking at. And second, we're looking at congestion data from Waze, where this figure is just showing total congestion across the city. And again, as with we see mobility translating into like less mobility across the city, less people on the road, and we're also seeing less congestion. And where we see lower congestion really persist for like many months after these mobility policies are being implemented. Next slide, please. And then looking at especially the Waze data as well, we both see a reduction in congestion, but we also see that this pattern differs across different points of the city. So what this map is showing is the change in congestion at 6 p.m., so right before the curfew hits, relative to baseline levels. So the red are showing areas that you actually see an increase in congestion relative to pre-COVID, while green is areas that you saw a reduction in congestion. So what it's showing is that some of the main routes in the city, as people are kind of maybe going home from the central business district or the central parts of the city, there is a lot of congestion as people are trying to beat the curfew to get home. But what the green is showing is that you see less congestion, as the figure on the bottom left shows. You see an increase in speeds as well. So because of less congestion, people are able to kind of drive faster, potentially more unsafely because it's faster as well. So next slide, please. And then thinking about how kind of the mobility patterns and all these policies are translating into crashes, what we notice is that we see initially a sharp reduction in crashes across different severity types, and we're seeing this both from kind of Flare and the police data as well. But we notice is after just even a couple of months, crashes are going back to kind of pre-COVID policies level, which we think is interesting just because we see in the congestion data and mobility data that both congestion and mobility are quite lower. So what we're thinking here is that potentially the possible increase in speeds is that there's less people on the road, but despite less people on the road, people are able to drive more safely. So that's why you see crashes kind of quickly reducing after initial policies, but then kind of going back to pre baseline levels fairly quickly, despite the reduction in mobility. So next slide, please. And looking at kind of types of crashes, one things we notice is that a large increase in crashes coming from motorcycles, which we find is likely driven by mobility services or kind of food delivery services or other delivery service, just as people are working from home and staying at home a lot, you see an increased demand for motorcycles. So even if we look at registration data in Kenya, there's a sharp increase in motorcycles being registered after COVID, despite a reduction in everything else. And we also see this translate into the crash data, where we see from multiple sources a large increase in motorcycles as well. So again, we kind of get granular into the types of crashes and think about the reasons for that as well. So next slide, please. And again, thinking about the intersection of the changes in mobility policies that we see in crashes, and again, across the number of roads, we see sharp increases in congestion and changes really happening right before the curfew as well. And in the crash data as well, we also see a sharp increase in crashes relative to the baseline right as this curfew is being implemented. So again, the with people are kind of rushing to get home. They may be driving more unsafely. There's kind of like maybe even more people on the road during this kind of like intense hour before the curfew. And again, we think this is generating some more general policy insights as, curfews are not just implemented in COVID, they're a widely implemented policy, but it kind of helps us think about the trade-offs between, wanting to use the curfew to get people home versus, this curfew was implemented right at rush hours, having these downstream impacts of encouraging people to rush to get home and driving more unsafely. So it can help us think about kind of balancing these different impacts that a curfew might have. So next slide, please. And that's it for me. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thanks for calling in from Kenya. We appreciate it. Last, but not least, I'd like to introduce Riza Teresita Halili. She's the project manager with the UNDP Pinting Lab based in Manila, and she's also a partnership data fellow. And she's going to discuss how her team used alternative data to inform COVID policies in the Philippines. Over to you.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Holly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day. I'm Riza Halili. I'm the project manager for UNDP Pintig Lab. So, Pintig means pulse or heartbeat in our language. So, it's like a pulse lab. We are the Advanced Data Analytics Lab of UNDP Philippines. So, the next slide. We started our partnership with the Development Data Partnership in 2021, and it was really sprung out of how COVID-19 really changed our relationship with data and put a premium on real-time data, because at that time we really were able to see how having the right data at the right time really means saving lives. And we worked with the Department of Health on COVID data, etc. at that time. And we were really looking at non-traditional data and partnerships with the private sector as a potential resource for real-time data, because the data from more traditional sources might not be available during the minute of actual need. And so we embarked on a data exploration um, exercise using DDP data in the Philippines with the intention to create or enhance existing data sets and data platforms with non-traditional data that can be accessed publicly. So in the next slide, the main challenge we wanted to address in the Philippines is the absence of high frequency data and how this limits the pace of public action in the country. And we really wanted to explore and promote in government and also the academy and larger society with different stakeholders, how non-traditional data can really be an ideal supplement to official statistics. In the next slide, the solution we were looking at when we started was really thinking about leveraging the availability of high frequency and geospatially disaggregated data sets. And some of the use cases or the data sets you were thinking of exploring include market research data on fast moving consumer goods from Nielsen, looking at also air pollution indices from Space No, traffic congestion indicators from Waze, and mobility indices from Google Community Mobility Reports. The larger goal, as I mentioned earlier, is really to have open data sets and data platforms, and also enhancing existing ones with non-traditional data. And the key aspect here is also making it available to a broad community of development and policy research across the country, so that various areas of socioeconomic recovery can be looked into using different data sources and partnerships between, even down up to the local level, and civil society can be made based on evidence and research. So in the next slide, we embarked on this data exploration exercise, and we're still in the middle of it, with these three major impacts in mind. So first is to have easy to access high frequency socioeconomic indicators for socioeconomic planning. And this data are not only essential in the planning of policies and programs, but also trying to promote the use of data and non-traditional data in helping to plan implementation of these policies and programs, and also monitoring how we are, and also feeding that into the next cycle of the program. How do we improve based on the evidence and trends that we see? So the next desired impact we had is to really create partnerships between government agencies and non-government organizations on policy analysis and also research. So by our partnership with the DDP, we are already in conversations with the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, really trying to find avenues in which we can leverage non-traditional data in the public space and also the academe. So we co-authored a discussion paper focused on this specifically and putting in different use cases. And in that discussion paper, we used waste data from DDP um, to assess policies regarding traffic in the Philippines. Oh, if you've been to Manila, you know traffic is a huge problem here. So that was a good use case then. And the next step from there is to really try to see different avenues where we can expand these use cases and really use it for decision making. But at that point, we were really able to, whet the appetite of different stakeholders, both in the public and private space. And then the third desired impact is to really have publicly available knowledge products that leverage the use of non-traditional indicators. So in the photo here, we put together a policy note through the Development Future series on leveraging non-traditional data sets, um, for assessing socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 across Philippines households. So here we use data from Nielsen on fast-moving consumer goods as a proxy for household consumption. And we were able to see that the pace of recovery for more well-off socioeconomic groups are that the pace of recovery is faster than those from lower socioeconomic groups. So that was really interesting to see, and this one we shared with our government partners. So in the last slide, which is pretty much, I guess, the end of my presentation, but just to really say that we are really in the thick of data exploration with the DDP, and really trying to explore avenues in which private sector data can support the Philippine government in decision making in the new normal. We really see this as a key input into what is now, like a new relationship Philippine society has with data and its power for saving lives and making lives better. Thank you, everyone. I give the floor back to you, Holly. Thanks.
Thank you, Risa. That was wonderful. I'd like to invite all the speakers to show themselves, and then Casey to give us closing remarks, and to see if there are any questions from online or in the audience.
Great, thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to everyone that's presented and to the audience for sharing in this time with us. I think there was one question from Javier about the role of civil society organizations in this partnership and whether or not they count as members of the private sphere. And so I just wanted to flag that I think here, when we're thinking about public-private collaborations, we're thinking about private in the sense of usually for-profit entities that have data that they might often guard a little bit more carefully than so readily share with development partners. So that's sort of the differentiation there. But of course, we all partner closely with civil society organizations as part of our work. There was another question from Kaboba about where to stay in touch with us. I'm a little biased, but of course, I'm going to suggest LinkedIn, but certainly through Whova as well as another way to be in touch. I think those were the key questions from the audience. I know we're coming close to time, and I don't want to get in between anyone and their lunch, but just wanted to thank the Development Data Partnership for really pioneering a way for us as data partners to share data effectively with development institutions. All of these projects were really good examples of how we can leverage privately sourced data to inform the response, particularly in emergencies. And so what I might encourage the audience to think about today is how we can take steps as a data community to encourage public sector familiarity with private sector data sets even prior to these emergencies. I would propose that the Development Data Partnership is in fact doing this and pioneering this by having shared standards around agreements, developing shared standards around privacy protections, and encouraging partners to experiment with data in a way that builds trust in our data sets, but also helps uncover new insights that can have important development outcomes. So thank you to Holly and all of the team at the bank and the other institutions, the IMF, the OECD, the UNDP, et cetera, for supporting this work and guiding us in it. Holly, back to you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I guess it's 12 o'clock, so everyone, thank you so much for coming. It means the world to us. For more information, you can go to datapartnership.org, and I'm around. And thank you so much to our speakers who are up at all hours of the day to meet with us. And thanks to our enormous team that made this happen. Just give them a clap. A lot of clap. Okay, so 谢谢大家，谢谢，thank you.